The Truth Girls.
Hi everyone. Well, I've been doing a lot of research on mental illness. Why are people so nuts in North America? Why do so many children have psychiatric labels? And why are there so many school shootings and things like that? A lot of people already made the connection between the school shootings and psych meds. And psych meds definitely have risks, especially for young people, of psychotic behavior or aggression and things like that. But I don't think it's just the psych meds, because you got to remember those kids already had problems before they were on them. That's why they put them on the psych meds. Could it be that there are biological causes that are preventable and reversible, such as viral illnesses, autoimmune reactions, and reactions to things in the diet? I think this is very likely, and in fact, there's a lot of scientific evidence that supports this. And I guess some of you probably cringe when I use the word mental illness, but I mean disorders that have psychiatric symptoms. And let's admit that we do have a problem with that here in North America. One of the problems that we have in North America, especially America, is these school shootings and violence with children. And recently there was another case like this concerning a 17-year-old called Grant Achord, who planned to blow up his school Columbine style. And he had already put together several bombs, and he had a very detailed manifesto in his diary. And he's being held on $2 million bail, and he's facing numerous charges, including attempted murder and things like that. When I looked at the case of Grant Achord, what struck me was that his mother says that he suffers from Pandas. It's a pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disorder associated with strep. So it's something that can be triggered by strep, where you actually start producing antibodies to your own brain instead of the strep. And you get a sudden onset of very severe symptoms, including OCD, and obsessions, notably also obsession with death, tics, and your temper becomes very irascible, you become kind of illogical, you have a lot of anxiety, a whole lot of different problems. And apparently Grant Achord was suffering from Pandas. You know, if someone is ill and not in their right mind because an autoimmune reaction is causing damage to their brain, well, I don't think they should be held accountable for their actions the way you would expect anyone else to be. He's being charged as an adult, and I'm interested to see how much his medical condition will be taken into account when they do the sentencing. According to this article, the condition Pandas is rare, say the doctors. But I beg to differ. I think that actually Pandas is not as rare as they think it is. And I think that there are just varying degrees of it, but that it's probably a lot more common than we think, that bacterial and also viral infections affect the brain in particular of children, and that this results in behavior changes and sometimes psychosis. Look, there's a page here about Pandas in case you're interested and you'd like to know what the treatment is. There's also this blog here regarding Caroline, and here's a whole bunch of information on how she was diagnosed with Pandas. And then there's also a lot of information here on how her parents have been treating it. And they started out with antibiotics and things, but they've moved to natural methods. And one of the herbs that they're using is olive leaf extract, and there's a lot of information here on CureZone about olive leaf extract. And I'll tell you partly why I'm so interested in this is because something happened to my son recently. I'm realizing now that it had actually been going on for quite some time, but the changes were very subtle, and it just looked like, you know, bad behavior, or, you know, some difficult behavior. And my kid had always been a very, very happy kid, and he never had tantrums, and suddenly he started to get tantrums and started doing strange things. And after his illness in March, I noticed some really drastic changes in his behavior, and I realized at some point that he did have tics and also obsessions. I mean, he was getting so loopy, his doctor thought he was on the autism spectrum, which at this point I think is probably unlikely, but I'm going to have him evaluated anyway. But we found that he did have a strep infection, that he'd been exposed recently, and his doctor, at my repeated request, started to look into Pandas and put him on antibiotics. And I also put him on some herbs, and his behavior just improved so drastically within a few days. And now it's been about a week or so, and it's a really, really big change. And I'm convinced that whatever behavioral or neuropsychiatric problems he was having were related to some infectious cause, because he's doing really well. And I think that the olive leaf extract had a lot to do with it. I see a big change. I see an almost like immediate improvement when he takes it. And I'm trying to be, you know, very objective and scientific about it, and not, you know, it just be my wishful thinking. But I've kind of tested it, like withheld it, or, you know, given it different times, and I do notice a difference. Also borage oil, which is anti-inflammatory. So anyhow, this is what sparked my interest in this. And the link between viral illnesses, bacterial illnesses, and mental illness is not something new, and in fact it can affect adults as well. And there's an article here, Medical Breakthrough, the Viral Link to Mental Illness, and they were talking here about what happens when a mother catches the flu while she's pregnant, and why this is known to raise the risk of schizophrenia in the child. And they say that it's not the infection itself, it's the mother's immune system's response to the infection, and the way that this compromises fetal brain development. This has actually been known for a long time, and a neurologist, Dr. Russell Blaylock, has pointed this out, and also pointed out how anytime you stimulate the mother's immune system during pregnancy, it raises the risk of schizophrenia and also autism. And so if you do that with an illness, you could logically think that if you stimulate the immune system with a vaccine, that this would also raise the risk. So just thought I'd point that out. And here's another really interesting paper, Behavioral Consequences of Infections of the Central Nervous System, with emphasis on viral infections. And they describe several cases of adults whose behavior changed. I mean, they really went psychotic following some kind of viral illness. And you should read some of the cases here. What's interesting is a couple of them, they mentioned that the person was admitted to the psychiatric hospital, and then they spiked a fever that in one case went as high as 107. And then after that, their symptoms abated and they were released asymptomatic. So this is, I guess, different than Pandas, which is an autoimmune response, but the fever must have played a role in killing the infection, and that their symptoms were related directly to this infection, which must have somehow gotten into their brain. Look, I'm no scientist, but I think it's interesting, and you might want to look at this paper. I think this stuff probably happens a lot, and a lot of people who are labeled as mentally ill, or even people who engage in criminal or aggressive, violent behavior, you know, a person who's healthy and in the right mind probably wouldn't do those kind of things. I tend to think that this kind of stuff happens a lot, and there are people who are not ill enough to be diagnosed schizophrenic or bipolar or have a label, but they're not well either, and they're really not in their right mind, and then they will do things that could have you know, criminal consequences, and they'll end up in jail, but they're really not well. So here's another thing I'd like to point out while I'm on the subject. 60 years of research links gluten grains to schizophrenia, and there's a lot of research showing that in some people, eating grains with gluten can cause damage to the immune system and to the brain, and result in schizophrenia symptoms. And one thing that they noticed was that during war times, when wheat was a lot less accessible, schizophrenia admissions also went down. And here's another article. You should really check out these articles, and you'll understand the mechanism by which this happens. That certain people, it's like a form of celiac disease. Well, here's the second article. Wheat madness is this popular grain provoking mental illness, from Natural News. It's like some people have, it's like a form of celiac disease without the GI symptoms, but they can't do what their body can't handle the gluten, and in particular the gliadin, which is like a natural opiate. And with some people, this will just get into their brain and cause psychiatric symptoms. And the other thing are the lectins in the wheat that are neurotoxic and prevent nerves from regenerating. So this is especially important for people who have neurological diseases like multiple sclerosis or Alzheimer's, that there could be a link with this. And it says here lectins also destroy the villi in the intestinal tract. And the gut is like a second brain. They're actual glial cells, like brain cells in the gut. So there's a big gut-brain connection. And so if you, you know, you might want to look into that, gluten and lectins and gliadin, because I think that a lot of people, in fact, they know that 30 to 50% of white North Americans have this non-celiac gluten intolerance. So I imagine there are a lot of people going around out there who are suffering all kinds of physical and psychiatric symptoms because of their gluten intolerance and not even realizing the connection. And we eat so much wheat around here, so I could see how that would be a really big problem. And by the way, the wheat recently turned out to be contaminated with GMO, but that's another story. And here's one last thing regarding schizophrenia and nutrition. Long-chain omega-3 fatty acids for indicated prevention of psychotic disorders. So what they did was they tested to see how much giving omega-3s during the prodromal stage of schizophrenia, it's where they have symptoms but they haven't gone full-blown, what effect that would have. And they found that it really reduced the incidence of them going fully psychotic. So in the omega-3 group, 2 out of 41 individuals progressed to full schizophrenia, and in the group without intervention, it was 11 out of 40. That's in the placebo group, transition to psychotic disorder. So these are all things that I think need to be considered. And what I think is really unfortunate and sad and just tragic is that there are probably so many adults and also children who are suffering from these psychiatric symptoms because of things like their diet and also exposure to viruses. And for example, with pandas, there's a lot of resistance in the medical community to look at this as a true cause of this neuropsychiatric symptoms that the kids have. Some people a lot of doctors just don't even know about pandas. And even among those who do, there's a lot of controversy about, how real it is or how it should be diagnosed. And right now it has to be diagnosed according to very strict criteria with very sudden onset of very severe symptoms. But I think that probably if they gave it a little more leeway, they would see that a lot of kids are having autoimmune reactions to bacteria and virus, especially strep. And it's not only those who have like very obvious tics. I think that that's when it goes full blown, but they should probably be a little more open-minded and looking at treating it before it gets to that stage, because I think that that's what I found with my son. He was heading towards that, and it was really scary. I mean, we were pretty scared, and we started to realize, why people put their kids on psych meds, because it's very hard to deal with. It's very scary. But we didn't do that. We're treating him naturally, and so far it's going really well. But so there's my vlog, and let me know what you think of all this, and I hope the information is useful to you. And thanks for listening to me, and I'll see you next time.